First Sergeant Kep here with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters, and today we are reviewing the 1865 Quartermaster Manual. I wanted to review this book because it is very expensive. It was about $95 shipped to my door, and I bought it from the Regimental Quartermaster. I was on the fence for quite a while about purchasing this book because it was so expensive, and there was no information online as to what was actually in it. So I kind of took the leap of faith and hoped that I'd get a home run with the wealth of information that may or may not have been in this book. And I was very happy. And so I wanted to provide you some detail as to what this manual contains and help you make a better decision as to whether or not you or your unit needs a copy of this book. So this is sort of a passion project of the authors. You may recognize them from other books. One of the authors wrote essentially the go-to book on how to make shelter tents, which I've used all the time, and it's one of my favorites. This book took him over a decade to write because all the research was scattered all over the place. They had to go to numerous archives. Many documents were missing. And the story of the manual itself is also fairly fascinating. The Union Army was not prepared for war, and I think at the time the Quartermaster Department only consisted of maybe 52 officers. And when you start having to equip millions of soldiers, the lack of standardization really created complexities and frustrations for supplying such a massive military effort. Unlike, say, the 1861 Ordnance Manual, and they also had an older one, I think, which is available for free online and had tons of information, the Quartermaster Manual didn't really exist. Kind of what was sort of common practice during the time was a depot would make an item and work with the federal government, and that garment, if it passed inspection, would be the standard. So they would have sometimes a physical item that they would compare another item made from, say, a depot, and if they matched, they would pass inspection, and that would be issued to the Army. And that provided a lot of inconsistencies. And what inspired the Quartermaster for the Army to start this project mid-war was his personal frustrations and experiences with the lack of standardization with wagons. The government had general guidelines for wagon construction, but since they were made by different contractors with limited detailed information, none of the parts were interchangeable. So if you had a damaged wagon that needed repair, those repairs would have to be made specifically for that wagon in the field, which could cause many delays in supply chains. And so he sent to work one of the bright stars in the Quartermaster Department to start assembling standards immediately. And he put forth his best effort and put in a ton of work, but the war ended before this could actually be issued. And I think that's an important historical footnote. While many of these standards align to what actually existed and was issued and was common practice already in the war, make sure you do your extra research to parse out whether or not it was an active used standard, or maybe it could have been more of a vision statement of where the Quartermaster's Department was hoping the Army and the supply would go to in the near future if the war continued, for example. But once the war ended, this project got mothballed and kind of lost to history. And thanks to these authors, we can now review the internal workings of the Union Army's supply. Who needs this book? Well, I would say if you're a maker, this is absolutely required. If you're, say, an authentic, definitely you need to have this book. I think everyone else, this would be, if you're just generally fascinated with history and equipage, this is a great book to have. But I think this would be handy for at least someone in every company to have a copy of and have it available for reference and research by other people in your unit. This isn't going to be something that is mandatory reading for everyone in the hobby, like, say, your drill manual would be. The table of contents is right here, so you can kind of get a sense of what the book contains. There are rather large sections regarding wagons, wagon construction, caissons, and other artillery hardware, as well as the purchase and evaluation of horses and mules, because the Army required hundreds of thousands of horses and mules during the course of the war, and all their associated tack and accoutrements. And that was all from the personal experience in the field of the quartermaster. So a big chunk of this covers those areas. So if you do a cavalry or a teamster impression, this could be a very valuable resource for you as you sort of build your kit and evaluate your accuracy. My favorite parts of this book include the camp and garrison equipage. So everything on how to make shelter tents, common tents. They tell you how to make a Sibley tent. They tell you how to make a stove for a Sibley tent in this book. They go into in-depth detail about common types of fabric, the properties of fabric, types of threads that you would use, and what they would be used for, different types of rope and what to look for in rope. They have numerous pages of weights and measures and formulas for various things. They have one table that addresses how much weight can be carried on various thicknesses of ice, so if you're transporting your army. And it also has numerous pages of various tools for trades. So if you are doing one of the highly underrepresented impressions of a teamster or a tradesman, they go through in detail sort of all the requirements for blacksmiths, wheelwrights, and carpenters, which we did a short video on the tool list for Civil War Army carpenters. And it also talks about all the accoutrements and tools and consumables that should be with those various trades at the time. And it goes into how to make brogans, how to make a knapsack, how to make a haversack, what are the dimensions, what are the paint formulas that the quartermaster department was expecting. It has basic office supplies. It has different books, memorandum books, what they expected for a ruler, paper weight, pencils, erasers, ink stands, and when stocking or supplying a garrison, they have a really great section on making iron bedsteads or bunks. So in another one of our videos, I showed how to make a field cot. Well, if you have a garrison impression and you wanted to have an example of a Quartermaster Manual bed, the iron bedsteads were just made out of black pipe that you can get today from any hardware store. Iron bedsteads to be constructed of galvanized or painted iron gas pipes, all coupled and screwed together with galvanized or painted iron couplings. The upright posts and all the rails to be of 1-inch gas pipe. The feet were just the flanges that you can also get in the same section. And there's like a page and a half on how to construct those iron beds and bunks for a garrison. Talks about tables, leather hoses for fire engines, pages and pages of fabrics, cooking equipment, and different types of leather, what to look for in leather. And I think one of the interesting things about reading this book is it helps us reset our understanding of period correct vocabulary. So there's a lot of modern terms that sneak into our hobby in the way that we refer to tools and other equipage, uniforms, for example. We use brogans, but the manual uses booties, and booties would have been a much more common term in referring to your footwear than we kind of see in the hobby today. And I've read this book a ton of times, and I'm still learning new things. One of the most recent things I found in this book was a reference to tent buttons. And it's not like the buttons that hold your shelter halves together. It's a piece of wood, a round piece of wood with a hole drilled in the middle. And from the best that I can surmise is that they would be issued to hold the doors of wall tents open. That's something I've never seen in the hobby, but it's mentioned in the book. The authors also have numerous examples of pictures of showing different variations of what was expected, and it has lots of information about tent stakes and tent pins, which is a weird historical obsession of mine. And let's see, probably another thing that's going to be of big interest. So if you're a pioneer or your unit has a lot of fatigue details, it has many pages talking about sort of standard tools of soldiers. So what would kind of be a common sight for an axe or a spade or a pickaxe, a picket shovel. And it also goes into detail on how to construct the various harnesses and sheaths for those tools. And I know a lot of campaigners, they're doing a specific battle to battle sort of impression, but soldiers and the diaries from our company mention the soldiers using tools all the time, even for sometimes relatively short stays. One reason you don't see tools represented too much in individual impressions is because we're reenacting. It's like, yeah, I know in Company F, Wyman White has been talking about his struggles with their company not having as many axes as the other sharpshooter companies, and then other sharpshooters stealing those axes, and he has to be clever in how he custom made his axe handle so he can identify it and give the other unit a hard time. But the other important part is, as reenactors, we can't live off the land. So a lot of soldiers either stole tools or borrowed them from farmers and civilians as they were trying to set up their camp and process firewood. Many pages on flags. If you like to issue things, like rations is a common impression for a lot of units. If you want to do a reissue of equipment, there's pages and pages on how to package and bale equipment. The different layers of wax paper, plain paper, the types of twine that you used. Say, for example, how many brogans to a bundle and how much that would weigh and how many would fit onto a train car. So that could be a really cool thing if you wanted to do an issuing of equipment. You can find all the period correct standards for that in this book as well. It also goes into something that we don't really see in the hobby, and that is the period references to uniform sizes. So what was a size number 3 coat, for example, that details the dimensions in the manual too, as well as all the dimensions for uniforms and haversacks and knapsacks and all that, and drawers, and yeah, pretty much anything you can think of. Like every little bit of hardware is listed in here, and I think it's really interesting to consider that as much as some forums and organizations really want to have like this as generic as possible impression of a Union soldier, I think that's important. I think it's making a certain impression in a consistent way. But the thing is, just by reading this and the fact that it was never issued, shows that there was mass inconsistency, not only between depots, but you can even find those inconsistencies within a single depot. And then you also have many soldiers at the time that were also being supplied by their state governments. So you're going to have variation between different state units as to the types of uniform and mess kits and canteens, you name it. So, and then you also have, of course, contractors trying to take advantage of the system and selling shoddy goods. So you're going to have varying levels of quality of gear. And we see that a lot, actually all the time, in the sharpshooters, because we were probably the least standardized union units of the war. And even looking at, even looking at period tintypes of sharpshooters, you would just kind of shake your head like, oh, that doesn't follow any uniform standards. Like, usually true. And speaking of uniform standards, one thing I think is a huge resource for reenactors is the whole back of the book are these amazing quality resolution prints of all the various military uniforms of the U.S. Army. So there's sort of the list, and I'll show you a couple. Well, yeah, so here's an interesting one. That's a stable frock. And private. Hopefully that's showing up. And so you can actually look at the uniform standards. You know, here's, yeah, fatigue blouse. Just pages of the various Union uniforms, musicians, cavalry, engineers. So it's I think it's definitely worth any quality history buff investing in. And let us know in the comments below if you have any questions of like, hey, is that in this book? And we'll try to let you know if you're kind of still on the fence as to whether or not you need to get this book. But like I said, not everyone needs this book, but more people, I think, should have this book. And I think the people that do have it should, you know, do their part and try to make it more visible and more accessible to people in the hobby, because there's so much detailed information and so many affordable and accessible ways to improve your impression with this book. I think would benefit the hobby in general. So thank you so much for watching and subscribing. And if you think someone else would benefit from this video, please feel free to share it, and we'll see you next time.